Hi, Marcia. Good morning.
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
No,
I'm doing pretty good, actually.
all right.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Hi, Lou. Good morning, Daniel.
Boker Tov, everyone. Rabbi.
Boker Tov, yeah.
Or, as we sometimes say, Boker mediocre. Hi, Steve.
Good morning, Boker Tov.
Good morning.
In Hebrew school at Beth Yeshurun, do they teach conversational Hebrew or just prayer Hebrew?
They're lucky if they teach prayer book Hebrew.
Oh, really? Because when I went to Hebrew school, we learned the prayers and conversational.
Yeah. I'm not directly involved with the school, so I can't really say for sure. Just my observation from what I see of the kids is that they really don't have great Hebrew skills
I see.
anywhere.
I think it's even less hours than we went. We used to go 3 days a week. I think now they're going 2 days.
Yeah. So, if you cut hours in a system where, we didn't become sages in a 6-hour-a-week school anyway, you're going to get predictable results.
Right.
Yeah. But it's hard to get families to fight the traffic more than,
That's true.
As much as our families did when we were in religious school.
The shame is that the alternatives to the CBYDS education is basically Orthodox separation of the curriculum between boys and girls, which is equally distasteful in my humble opinion. So people don't have a solid conservative hardcore Hebrew program to choose from.
Actually, Daniel, 2 of our kids attended Barron when we came to Houston, and they were not in single-sex classes.
Okay, then maybe I'm wrong about that. I thought I know the secular curriculum is certainly equal, but I thought boys and girls had separate levels and curriculums of the Judaic.
There is some difference in curriculum, but none of our children, or I'd say neither of our children who went to Barron, and Eliana was there through grade 8, and Shia was there as a junior and senior, and they were not in any sex segregated classes.
Okay, well, I stand corrected.
Yeah, that doesn't mean
I think at Lubavitch they do separate at the higher level.
Well, yeah, surprise.
I think they do that to keep the boys from being too embarrassed. The girls will put them to shame.
Could be. Well, good morning, everybody. Last week we began with the introductory video on this unit on procreation. Right? So just to summarize where we're headed here, the scripture says, "Be fruitful and multiply," and we depend on that to some degree for Jewish continuity. But there are other conflicting values. You have the heavy cost of raising Jewish children. You have those who are struggling with infertility and the associated costs of that. So when you put procreation on one side and you have education and, good marital relationships and financial stability and the health and welfare of women and children and communities, and you set those up with some degree of opposition, then you face a challenge for Jewish continuity. So let's go right into the text. And here we have the text from Genesis chapter 1. Right? This is kind of the foundation text for, the value of procreation for later scholars and commentators. God created human beings in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase, pru-urvu, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth. So just looking at these verses, why does God want human beings to be fertile and increase? Yes, Ronnie.
I thought one of the mitzvot that we can do is to take care of the world that God created. And you need a population to do that.
Yes. So if you're going to take care of the earth, if you're going to manage civilization, you need people to do that, right? Anything else?
Well, if they don't procreate, then in 1,000 years, there won't be anybody left.
If you want to have a world with people, then yes, procreation is, there. Now, if you will, yes, Chris.
Yes, Rabbi, to increase the good, as we follow the mitzvah, to increase the good in the world.
So the idea is you increase people, you increase the good in the world. So, that assumes that people are good, right? Hopefully you're correct, right? Now, if you go back and look at this once more, let's see, it says, that God blessed them and said to them, be fertile and increase, right? So is this a blessing or is it a commandment? Or is it just an expectation? Right? It says God blessed them and then said to them, be fertile and increase. Is this just a blessing that God extends to people? Or is it a commandment? Or is it just an expectation?
Can it be both?
Yeah.
I suppose, but if it's a commandment, then it would seem that would supersede everything else, right? Yes, Sylvia.
Well, it's in Stitzel or in the modern Orthodox Haredi community with Rouhani, she takes it almost to me as a commandment because of the problem she has. And of course, the way the Orthodox community, her particular Orthodox community, looks on having a surrogate. I mean, that's another problem.
Yes. By the way, which episode are you up to, Sylvia?
Don't spoil
I
it.
finished it.
You
Don't
finished.
spoil
Okay,
it.
so yes. So please don't
Don't spoil it.
Oh, I'm not saying.
no spoilers here.
No.
For those of us who are only halfway through season 3 of Stiesel.
Oh,
Right?
okay.
But yes, for her, it's clearly a mitzvah. And, to the extent that it's something that, she feels that she needs to do in her community. What I'm asking you to do
It's a
is
book.
just to look at the text and analyze the text and see, do you think it's a blessing or a commandment or just an expectation? Yes, Ronnie.
I mean, obviously it's a blessing because it says he blessed them.
Uh-huh.
It's a blessing. And I think if it was a commandment, it would have been worded differently.
Okay.
It could say, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
The wording is specifically, he blessed them.
Uh-huh.
So
Steve?
it's a blessing.
I think like someone else said, we almost have a whole separate discussion on what the difference is between a blessing and a commandment. Okay, but I think to some extent, when God gives us commandment and we fulfill it, it's like a blessing. I think he's commanded us to do this, and when we actually do it, that's almost like that's almost fulfilling it. Then I think that they are connected.
Yeah. Lou?
I don't accept that it has to be mutually exclusive. So God blessed them, and then God gave them a commandment. I don't think it's an expectation. I think it's a commandment because it's a very positive and precise statement.
All right. Yeah, Daniel?
I tend to also believe it's a commandment, particularly in the paragraph that we haven't read yet, the one below it. It sounds much more like a commandment, but just like all the rest of our Torah commandments, it says be fruitful and multiply. It doesn't say have 12 children. I mean, in other words, it doesn't supersede the idea that you have a responsibility for how many people you're bringing in, that you should be able to take care of them all, using your own labors, so on and so forth. So some elements of our population have taken it to an extreme that I don't think was ever the original intent.
So you can have a mitzvah with limits, right? It's not just, continue to do this until you drop. All right. Yeah. Other thoughts, comments here? Yeah, Ronnie.
This is off subject, but this is something that's always bothered me. I'm going to show my ignorance. If Adam and Eve had 2 sons, how were they supposed to repopulate the earth?
Okay, so the short answer to that is Scripture clearly doesn't tell you everything that happens.
So
Okay.
they had, yeah.
Clearly. Chris?
Yes, Rabbi. Well, what about the word be? That sounds like a commandment to me. Be fertile and multiply. And I like what Daniel said. It says be fruitful and multiply, or be fertile and multiply. But it did not say children. And I thank you, Daniel, for that.
Yeah. So it's, I would say, just from the Hebrew, it's not totally clear one way or the other. Yes, Lou?
This section, verses 27 and 28 in chapter 1, come before any explanation of the Garden of Eden, and certainly before they eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge. So if you accept that the Torah is laid out chronologically, then this is very early in the life of man, or the soul of man, and there's no other explanation of what life is like.
Okay. Well, let's, but we don't, yeah, Jerry.
I think, that, the Orthodox say Peru or Vu is the first mitzvah in the Torah. They say that's the first of the 613. That's right.
Not
agree with that?
exclusively so. Because when you talk, the 613 mitzvot are the mitzvot that are clearly directed to the Jewish people. And this
Right.
seems to be said to everyone. However, when you look at the mitzvot that we understand classically to be directed to all people, like the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, the 7 Noachide commandments, guess which one is not there?
That's it.
Procreation. Okay. So even if you say this is one of the 613 mitzvot given to the Jewish people, it's clearly given before. And yet we don't categorize, but before there is a Jewish people, and yet we don't categorize it as one of the mitzvot that applies to all people. So that, to my mind, is at least some evidence that the verse is not necessarily a commandment. Okay? Or at least is not treated as a commandment in Jewish law, the same way that other commandments we are given are treated. Okay, let's take a look at text number 2. Okay. And so this is when God blesses Jacob. And so the whole business of being, pru or vu, which is here in the singular, pre urve, right? It's a little bit more concrete. God said to Jacob, I am El Shaddai, be fertile and increase. A nation, yea, an assembly of nations shall descend from you. Kings shall issue from your loins, right? So here, the concrete part of this is that procreation is now translated into a national vision. That Israel has a destiny. Yes, you will have kings, you will have a whole people, right? So how does that shift the focus of this commandment or blessing or whatever, to be fruitful and multiply? How are we supposed to understand this text? Yes, Lou.
What is the significance of the change in vowel from Peru Urvu to Pere Urve?
Because he's talking to Jacob as an individual, right? But it seems that there's some, there's a sense in which this is collective, because the verse continues to talk about the nation that will descend from you. Yes, Marcia. You have to unmute, Marcia.
It just seems like it's specific for the Israeli people, the Jewish nation, as opposed to the world, the total population. So it's more focused on who he's commanding to be fruitful and multiply, as opposed to the general aspect that you referred to earlier.
Mm-hmm. So this may be more directed specifically to the Jewish people. I mean, it seems like that. Yes, Daniel.
Well, maybe I'm reading it wrong. It says, be fertile and increase a nation, yea, an assembly of nations. In other words, it's specifically saying that the commandment is, it is saying that it's not just the Jewish people. Am I reading that wrong? What's an assembly of nations mean? Is that making sense, Rabbi?
It seems, and this is just my own reading of it, I don't claim that this is authoritative. It seems that it is talking both about the Jewish nation and about others who will descend from Jacob. Okay?
Right.
Yes, Lou.
At this point in the story, Jacob has already fathered 13 children. So maybe 12, but maybe 13. And he's pretty much finished having children. So I'm wondering why, unless it's a commandment for the Jewish people, if it's a direct commandment at all to Jacob.
Yes, interesting observation. In other words, that, Jacob's already done his part for procreation. Okay.
Well, that makes it really weird because it sounds very clearly that he's talking about something that's going to happen, not something that's already happened.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Steve?
I mean, it's also something that happens anyway. It's not like we needed a commandment to procreate. I mean, it's happened, except the last part on there, but he gives a reason why. So in the first case, it was to rule over the animals. In this case, it's to, I guess, to create leadership, kings. I think that it's in plural doesn't necessarily mean to him directly. It can mean to his offspring, his people, continue to have for that purpose.
Yeah, the stakes are a little different here. Yes, Lou?
Steve brings up a very interesting question that if it's instinct or if it's instinct for animals, including humans, to procreate, because the animals, I don't think probably had a commandment from God. Is there something more that God expects of humans in the procreation process than he does of the rest of the animal kingdom?
Well, I hope God has higher expectations of us than, the expectations of the animals. Sure hoping that. Yep. Anyone else? All right. Well, clearly the stakes have gotten a little higher here. So let's look at our next text. All right. And this is from the Tosefta. Tosefta basically is stuff from the same period as the Mishnah that the rabbis knew about, but it didn't make it into the Mishnah. Okay. So here is this teaching of Ben Azai. Right? Ben Azai says, one who does not engage in procreation sheds blood and annuls the image of God. As it says, for in his image did God make human beings. And it is written, and you be fertile and increase. Right? So quoting, what we saw in text number 1 from the opening chapter of Genesis, Ben Azai carries this pretty far, right? Yeah. So, for Ben Azai, this is, if you don't procreate, it's as if you are denying God, right? And denying God's image, right? So why is
point.
that? Why is not having children tantamount to shedding blood? Anybody have a thought on that? Yes, Lou.
It ends the line. So with death of an individual would come no continued life.
Marcia?
Well, if you want to take it literally, a woman, when she becomes pregnant, no longer has her period. A woman who is not pregnant continues to shed blood on a monthly basis. So you think the reference could be specifically to the fact that, women are involved, of course, but without procreation, you continue to shed blood.
Marcia, in the English, it looks like that would be a reasonable interpretation. The Hebrew, shofech dam, is generally, it means bloodshed in the sense of killing.
Killing.
Yeah.
I see.
So probably could not be interpreted that way in the Hebrew.
Okay.
Daniel, you were going to say something a moment ago.
Yeah, this does not say that Ben Azai says if you choose not to procreate, then etc. It says who does not. So that seems to say that if you are infertile, then you are shedding blood and annulling the image of God, and it's not even your choice. In other words, you've sinned whether you had a choice about it or not. I don't think that's, is that what he meant?
That's what Ben Azai meant. I think Ben Azai was probably referring to people who chose not to have children, and possibly, because, this is an area where, Greek thought had some influence, and possibly was a comment on what they thought of homosexuality in that time. In other words, if you were having a homosexual relationship, that for them, they understood that as a choice not to procreate. Okay?
So do you annul the decree here, if you will, if you adopt? Does this affect adoption law in any way?
Well, it would if you were talking about people who adopted and were doing so to kind of fill a gap because they couldn't have children in the normal way. In reality, in that time, adoption didn't happen like that. Adoption happened when, there was a child who was orphaned and, or something had happened to the father and the mother maybe died in childbirth. And so, either a relative or someone who maybe had other children could take responsibility for that child. But, they didn't have the kind of social organization of that the way we do today. Okay. Yes, Jerry.
What about later on about the onan, where
That the what?
the onan, where they're,
Right.
what that?
Yes,
Okay. Does that fit into this?
possibly. I mean, again, here is someone, Onan, the son of Jacob. I'm sorry, not the son of Jacob, the son of Judah, grandson of Jacob, who specifically chooses to spill his seed rather than to inseminate his wife. Right? Now, why would one do that? Well, for some biblical scholars suggest that the reason for that was that there were guys who specifically did not want to get their wives pregnant because they felt that they would never be as desirable after that. So, and maybe that's why Onan and his older brother chose not to inseminate.
And what was the repercussion to them? That's what.
Well, we know what the repercussion was. They died.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were, if you just look at the Bible, it says they're punished for that. God was not happy with them. Okay?
You're going to get cut off one way or the other.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah. So here, why why is it that not having children is considered shedding blood? It's
Well,
not
maybe
clear.
Because they never exist. Oh, I'm sorry, Marcia, go on.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, could it mean that the Jewish people as a nation would be fewer, and therefore other nations would have more power over us, and therefore they may start wars with us and shed blood in that respect because we would no longer be equivalent to the other nations?
Possibly, although I'm skeptical that that's what Ben Azai was thinking about.
Okay, so Rabbi, what's your opinion?
Well, I don't know that there's one clear answer to the question, but
Oh, okay.
Daniel?
Well, I don't remember exactly how the law reads, but if you save a life or stop a life, it's like you've destroyed many more, and it's analogous to that. If they're saying that the lack of conception, if you don't conceive, then you are not only killing that entity, but any entities that would have
Future.
come from
Yeah.
that entity that never existed, which is, I don't agree with it, but I think that's what they're saying.
I think that is closer than anything else we've said to what Ben Azai is thinking. Okay? Because there is that clear statement in the tradition that we saw before about the how one who takes a life destroys an entire world,
Right.
many lives, and just the opposite if one saves a life. Right?
So is he equating the potential for life with actual life?
Apparently so.
Well, I guess that's
Was his opinion adopted? I'm sorry, Marcia, go on, I'll
no,
shut up.
no, you go ahead.
I was just going to ask if his position is considered halakha, was it adopted as a ruling?
It's kind of an extreme, although, again, clearly halakha has a preference for procreation. To suggest that you are shedding blood if you don't fulfill this mitzvah, that's somewhat extreme, right? So not so clear.
But what I was going to say was the argument for birth control is something that the that he would definitely be against. And I guess that's where the Orthodox, who literally interpret, the source material, are strongly against birth control.
Well, only up to a point, because at what point have you fulfilled the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply? So there are sources that say, well, once you've had a boy and a girl, then you fulfilled the mitzvah and you don't have to do more, right? Others would say, well, any 2 children would do, as long as you've had at least 2, right? Others would say, well, it says multiply, so maybe you have to have more than 2, right? There are diverse opinions about that, but the point is that at a certain point, one can have fulfilled the mitzvah of procreation, and then the sources would say, if you want to have birth control, because you just don't feel like you can afford to have more children or whatever, then it's permitted. Yes, Lou?
52 years ago in college, I learned in a class that the key variable in the increase of population was to have at least 2 daughters, because daughters are the ones who bear the children, and they have in a sense, a finite number of pregnancies available to them, and that if you only have 1 daughter, then you're replacing yourself, but if you have 2, you're allowing for the potential to grow.
Well, you still have to have males, I know that's a very female-centric view of the universe. As representing the male sex, not sure I would go along with that. Yes, Steve?
Yep. That assumes that the male can cross-fertilize multiple women. Maybe in the biblical days that was more common, obviously, but we have limited capacity nowadays.
I think it's an assumption, Steve. I think.
Well, let's hope so.
Although that's not true in every community, though, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go on to text number 4. All right. So this brings us into the 20th century. Right? And, the specific concern about the birth rate in the Jewish state. So Ben Gurion, and I don't have a date for this statement, but Ben Gurion said, if the Jewish birth rate is not increased, it is doubtful that the Jewish state will survive. As we have seen, from 1951 to 1966, the Jewish birth rate declined from 26.1 to 16.1 per thousand, whereas among the Arabs it rose from 37.6 to 43.4. The bodies that must deal with this problem are Jewish men's and women's organizations in Israel and the Jewish Agency. And this must be done in 2 ways. A, to bring home to the Jewish woman and the Jewish family that the future of their nation depends on their producing a sufficient number of healthy children. B, to provide large Jewish families with more economic, social, and educational assistance. Jewish women's organizations are doing good work. It is incumbent upon them to explain to women of European origin, hint, those who are having fewer children, as well as to those born in Israel, and to every Jewish woman capable of understanding the unique needs of a nation such as Israel, that their prime obligation to their people is to have at least 4 children, and as far as possible within 8 to 10 years after getting married. In other words, so that, it would happen, before they would become infertile. Any Jewish woman who, as far as it depends on her, does not bring into the world at least 4 healthy children is shirking her duty to the nation,
Whoa.
like a soldier who
Oh, boy.
evades military service. And it is the duty of the Jewish people as a whole to provide women with the economic, cultural, and social conditions to enable them to give these children a proper upbringing and education.
Rabbi,
Yes, Ronnie.
how many children did Ben Gurion have?
I don't know, but I'm sure somebody could look that up while we're talking. Yeah.
I am looking it up even as we,
Uh-huh.
I met one of his sons who lives in Florida. I think he's became a psychiatrist.
Uh-huh.
So I just got an email a few days ago with
Lou
the current
says 3.
the current fertility rate in 2019. The Jewish fertility rate was 3.09,
Oh,
and the Arab fertility rate declined, Israeli Arabs, to 2.98.
Uh-huh.
It used to be, I mean, Arab fertility was 6 births higher in 69.
Yes.
So it's dropped dramatically because of social status, of older wedding dates, expanded participation of women in the job market, all those reasons that basically Israeli Arab women become more like Israeli women, Jewish women.
Yeah. But, well, we haven't gotten to where Ben Gurion wanted to get everybody. The numbers have increased, and not just among Haredi families.
Right.
The birth rate has risen among non-Haredi families as well.
Mm-hmm.
So why, how do you understand what he says about healthy children?
Yes.
Right? You need to have a sufficient number of healthy children. Yeah, Ronnie.
Because having a child that had mental or physical problems could become a burden on the state.
Possibly. Yes, Jerry.
You also have the concept of I have to have a lot of children because I'm a farmer and I need to work the fields, and that goes on to I need to have a lot of children so I can put them in the army to defend the country.
Right. We're no longer in an agricultural society, but yeah, we need soldiers. We need to maintain a Jewish birth rate. Right. I think, maybe the reason for his mentioning healthy children means children who themselves will procreate.
right.
Because, if you have 6 children and they're all unable to have children themselves, then what do we got? So, but it's an interesting comparison. The woman who doesn't bring into the world at least 4 healthy children is like a soldier who evades military service. That's pretty stark. Yeah, Daniel.
well, I mean, that's saying that the only way a woman can contribute to her duty to the nation is by having children. And that is such an incredibly,
Right.
I mean, it's amazing that somebody that like this could say something like that.
Where did it say? Where did it
What?
say only? Where does it say only contribution?
Any Jewish woman who, as far as it depends on her, does not bring into the world at least 4 children. In other words, that's a precondition. If she doesn't do that, then she's shirking her duty.
But that's
But
not her only duty.
he's not saying that, you know, women can't serve the country in other ways, but he's saying that above all, we need Jewish people and more of them.
We need boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground, or booties on the ground, as the case may be. So, you know, I mean, in our society, in America, I mean, you do have a certain concern about the birth rate, right?
Mhm.
But Ben Gurion, in his time and with his status, could get away with saying things that nobody would be able to get away with today.
Right.
Yes, Steve.
But we're still saying the same thing, but you're right. We don't say it in the same words. We're still talking about birth rates and about things like that, critical mass. We just don't use it in the same term, even though it's obvious women have babies. So we use the same terminology, fertility rates. We just don't say a woman has to have it or in that same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, let's go to number 5. All right. This is from Rabbi Eliadorf. It was still a very active authority in our conservative movement. And this piece was written after the 1990 Jewish population survey. And that survey showed that there were, you know, higher rates of intermarriage, low rates of fertility among non-Orthodox Jews. And so you'll see how he addresses this need to have more Jewish children. He says, those who can produce or adopt children should see it as a mitzvah of the highest order to have more than the minimal number of 2, for nothing less than the future of the Jewish community and of Judaism depends on that. The Jewish community, after all, lost a third of its members in the Holocaust, and contemporary Jews are not producing enough children even to maintain their present numbers. Add to these factors the high rate of intermarriage and assimilation among Jews today, and it becomes clear that we Jews are in serious demographic trouble as a people. One needs a Jewish education to become an informed practicing Jew, of course, but people can be educated only if they exist in the first place.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The mitzvah of procreation, like all other commandments, does not apply to those who cannot fulfill it. But for those who can, propagation or adoption is literally a matter of life and death for us, not only as individuals and as families, but also as a people. All right. So it's a pretty strong statement. It is a mitzvah of the highest order. Right? Yes, Steve.
I just like to point out that Rabbi Dorf is known as probably one of the more liberal commentators, experts, I think, in the Jewish conservative world today. He's come up with a lot of very left, I would say left-wing, whatever you want to call him, progressive. So I think it's pretty amazing for him to come out with this statement.
Yeah, I would say he's, you know, on some issues more liberal, and on others tends to be kind of centrist. And so, yeah, this is where he takes a pretty hard line. All right, yeah, Ronnie.
Okay, one thing that bothers me about the statement is when he says one needs Jewish education to become an informed practicing Jew. Has he looked into the cost of day schools? Because that certainly becomes very unaffordable if you have a large family.
Yeah, so Rabbi Dorf, of course, is well aware of the cost of Jewish education. He lives in California where everything is expensive, right? And he knows what it's like elsewhere in the country too. And what he's saying is you can only address that if there are Jewish children in the first place. Let's have more children and address the problem of the cost of Jewish education. Yes, Daniel.
For me, Ben-Azi and Ben Gurion's statements have a significantly different tone. The last sentence of Rabbi Dorf's, is like all commandments does not apply to those who cannot fulfill it, those who can or adopt. He's putting some very significant conditions upon one's obligation to procreate.
Yes. Yes. So at least he has that caveat in there. Yes, Lou.
Rabbi Dorf was a scholar in residence for a weekend at Beth Yeshurun 10 or 12 years ago, give or take. And one of the points he brought up at his Saturday morning talk was that it was important for biological reasons for women to have children earlier than they currently are. That the way the biology works for the female body, I am no expert on this, so don't take the bank. But women are able to have more healthy children beginning in their late teen years as opposed to their 30s.
Right. Yeah. Of course. Then there is also a question of, how well prepared people are to be parents at a certain age. Yes, Steve.
But when I was in college, things could have changed. But I think at 35 is when a woman's chance of having more issues really rises dramatically, like off a curve. It's just a huge increase. But also there's a mathematical that if you're collapsing it earlier, like I had an employee, a girl who worked for me, who had all of her great-grandparents alive still. So if you're having new generations every 15 years instead of every 25 years, it obviously adds more people quicker.
Yep.
Mhm.
But again, if people are not in a position to support another generation, or going to be more limited in terms of their own education because of that, then you have other problems, which sort of brings us to the next text and the next segment of this unit, which raises the question of whether procreation is an absolute value. Okay? So let's go here to number 6, this text from Masachet Ketubot in the Talmud, which says, right, that this is how you can avoid pregnancy. Right? There are 3 categories of women who can engage in relations with contraception, such as it existed in that time. Right? And they are a minor, a pregnant woman, and a nursing woman. Okay? Why? A minor, she may not be fully grown enough, and she might conceive and die, would be more likely to. A pregnant woman, why? Because they believe that her existing fetus could be crushed by another fetus, could assume the shape of a sandal fish if she conceives a second
Oh
time.
my God.
Meaning that this, this fish that looked like a sandal. All right. And third, a nursing woman. Why? Because they felt that if she conceived, that might cause her milk to spoil, and then she weans her child, and that might also endanger the child's health. Okay? Now, some of those might not be considerations today. So, what does this say about limitations on procreation, on the mitzvah of procreation, assuming that we're going to accept that that's a mitzvah? Comments, questions, thoughts? Hmm?
Well,
It's okay to space out.
I mean,
Um,
they're all based on assumptions of creating more harm than good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the first one, they, the rabbis sanction sex and marriage for very young girls. And that's, today we would never suggest that, right? You wouldn't have a minor becoming married and giving birth. Okay. This second one is such a rare phenomenon that we wouldn't consider it a possibility today. And the third, well, a child doesn't have to be nursed, even if, and of course, lots of women don't nurse their children, but raise them to be very healthy. Okay? So, is there anything that we can generalize from this about the circumstances in which a woman can use contraception? Yes. Jerry?
Okay, the contemporary rabbis like Feinstein, did he give any rulings on adjusting this to the future?
Absolutely, they did, and if you look at even Orthodox authorities such as Moshe Feinstein, they are, they vary. Let's put it that way.
Because they don't object to contraceptive things anymore.
Well, they might under certain circumstances, and
Right.
they might not.
But usually it has to do with the health of the woman, right?
Well, that's more relevant in relation to abortion,
Right.
right? If there was a threat to the health of the woman from a pregnancy, then almost every authority would sanction the use of birth control. Okay, we're going to have to stop here. Thank you all very much. We'll carry on with the rest of this unit next week.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and
you.
those of you coming back for the second class, we'll be here in a few minutes. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you,
Yes,
Rabbi.
go,
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Yeah.